Thank you everyone for joining today. We are hosting this webinar ahead of International Labor Day, which is going to be celebrated tomorrow. And our webinar is titled The Invisible Work Behind AI Systems, Labor, Rights, and Civic Accountability in Africa. My name is Salam Abdullah. I am a researcher at the Global Center on AI Governance, and I have the pleasure of facilitating today's conversation. And I'm stepping in on behalf of my colleague Ayantollah, who sent his apologies because he was not able to attend due to kind of unprecedented travel plan changes. So to kind of frame the conversation that we are having here today, when we discuss artificial intelligence, a lot of the conversations revolve around economic transformation, innovation, but it often does not address the people who allow the systems to function. So this goes from those who are working data annotation work, content moderation, journalism, advocacy, and different folks who allow these systems to operate, and also those who challenge them. And there's also a lot of care labor that goes into this kind of work, both in the professional and personal sense, that those who engage with AI systems or those who use them are able to do so. And in the lead up to Labor Day tomorrow, our panel today is going to explore how these often overlooked forms of work are central to how AI systems are sustained, contested, and also held accountable in Africa. So our conversation is going to be grounded in lived experiences. It's also going to highlight how stronger labor protections, civic engagement, and rights-based policy response can help us ensure our AI systems serve societies and not just markets. So before we go to the questions, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. And these panelists are folks whom I've had the pleasure to engage with on different platforms before. So it's lovely to have them on our panel today. Our first panelist is Kauna Malgwi, who is a clinical psychologist and mental health advocate. Her experience spans across mental health, AI, and ethics. She has experience across digital rights and also mental health initiatives, and is a labor organizer and a leading voice in emerging African content moderator union. She's advocating for digital workers in Kenya and in Nigeria. She has championed labor rights on global platforms, including a speaking engagement at the European Parliament, and recognized as Time Magazine's list of 100 most influential people in AI. And she's a passionate advocate for ethical AI, human rights, and mental health. Our second panelist is Ephantus Kanyugi, who has thrived in the field of data annotation, and he's renowned for his precision and ability to tackle complex data sets, and his passion for innovation and dedication to uplifting fellow data labelers has driven his role as vice president of the Data Labelers Association. With a forward-thinking approach, Ephantus is committed to creating opportunities for growth and fostering a supportive community for all members. And finally, we also have Jacqueline Wambui Wamai, who is the ILAW Network Regional Coordinator for Sub-Saharan Africa based in Kenya. Her main focus is leading legal initiatives for ILAW members and workers' organizations in Africa. As workers and labor rights lawyer, Jacqueline is passionate about advocacy and has cultivated expertise in research, policy analysis, and legal advisory. She's worked extensively with lawyers, workers' organizations, and NGOs, coordinating efforts for workers' rights across various thematic areas, and has obtained her bachelor's degree in law from Catholic University of East Africa, a postgraduate diploma in law from the Kenya School of Law, and a master's degree in labor policies and globalization from the Berlin School of Economics and Law in Germany. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's kick off with Ephantus. So when we discuss data in annotation, it's often classified as kind of quote unquote low skilled job, even though it does require a lot of interpretive judgment. And how does this classification shape how not only how the work is valued, but also how it's recognized as having authority or agency over data sets, and also model behavior? If you could speak from your experience and also as from an organizing perspective.
Yeah, so thank you for the comprehensive introduction. So maybe we can start with data labeling. So at its core, data labeling is like teaching a child And when you teach a child, you point at objects and give them names and say that this is a cat, this is a car, this is danger. And data labeling basically works the same. So today I want to talk about something that is often invisible in conversations about artificial intelligence, which is the human beings behind it. And when we talk about AI, we usually focus on the technology. So we talk about the models, we talk about the algorithms, the breakthroughs. But AI does not exist in isolation. It usually depends on something that's more fundamental, and this is high quality labeled data. And behind every data set, we have real people involved. So this is where ethics in AI truly begins, not at deployment, not at regulation, but at the very foundation, which is data creation. So the goal today is very simple, to give an understanding of how human labor shapes AI ethics and fairness. So to go back to the data labeling, so as we said, it's like teaching a child, and how it works is that we take data labelers take raw data, which could be images, text, or videos, and then we organize it, we tag it, and give it meaning so that machines can be able to understand it. This process transforms messy, unstructured information into structured knowledge. And this is what powers the AI systems that we tend to rely on, that people are continuously getting to rely on every day. And this could be from self driving cars to medical diagnosis and to voice assistants. Now, closely related to this is another critical form of digital labor, which is content moderation. And this is like being a digital gatekeeper, where it's like a teacher where they maintain order in a classroom. So, moderators review online content such as images, videos, and text and decide what is safe and appropriate or harmful. This work protects millions of people every day. It helps prevent the spread of misinformation, abuse, and harmful content, and it ensures that the online spaces remain usable and safe. So, for example, when harmful content is removed from social media platform, or when toxic comments are filtered out, this is not just automation, this is human judgment at work. So this brings us to the sort of the human side of AI, where we have data labelers and moderators who do more than just follow instructions. They teach AI how to recognize, how to interpret, and how to reason. And the quality of their work directly affects how well AI systems actually perform. More importantly, human judgment bridges the gap between raw data and meaningful understanding. And this means that ethical data practices lead to reliable AI outcomes. So if we want ethical AI, we must first look at the conditions under which this human labor happens. And this is where we encounter serious challenges. The first being that there's a lot of exploitation. So across the industry, a lot of data workers face low pay. They work very, very long hours. There's lack of formal contracts, and then there's minimal recognition for the work. And then second, we have a lot of invisibility and isolation. So you have millions of workers contributing to AI systems globally, yet their work remains largely unrecognized. This means that they're very essential, but then they're very invisible. And then third, there's also a growing mental health crisis where content moderators and data labelers are often exposed to distressing material with little to no psychological support systems in place. And finally, a lack of policy and regulation where the technology has advanced rapidly, but the policies meant to protect these workers have not been kept. So in response to some of these challenges, is why we formed the Data Labelers Association. We established it in 2024 in Nairobi, Kenya. And the association exists to advocate for AI workers, speak about the challenges that workers are actually facing, and also trying to find ways to actually mitigate some of these challenges and some of these risks. So we are building a structure that represents the voices of those who power AI. So what makes our approach different? We could say that first we are worker-led. So our leadership comes directly from experienced data workers who understand the reality of the industry. Then we take a grassroots approach where we are built from the ground up, staying closely connected to the daily experiences of workers. And third, we try to emphasize transparencies where we are committed to ethical operations, clear communications, and accountability in everything we do. We also do a lot of mappings. We engage a lot of stakeholders, including academia, industry, and government, where we try to also educate the policymakers in terms of the challenges. What we've come to see is that there's a lot of people do not understand that there's a human element tied to this work that we do. And what we try to do is try to educate policymakers. So as they are trying to make policies to regulate these spaces, that they can know that there's a human labor aspect tied to it, and therefore be able to make policies that would actually protect the workers. We also try to measure impact, so we're tracking the improvement in worker conditions and compensations, and we also help publishing things like policy white papers to influence policy and industry standards. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ephantus, and for the background on the Data Laborers Association. I know that you're doing quite a lot of important work, both in Kenya and beyond. Um, so, Kauna, building off of what Ephantus has started to explain about what content moderation work entails, we can kind of understand that it plays a central role in both stabilizing AI systems and also the digital public sphere. But it's often discussed as kind of a downstream platform maintenance instead of an infrastructure company. So when moderation is framed this way, how do you think from the African Content Moderation Union perspective, how does it distribute responsibility between companies, labor regulators, and AI governance institutions?
Thank you, Shalim, and Ephantus have really said a lot. But content moderation, I think it's one of the key things when it comes to social media platforms and also the big tech companies' operations. Because without moderation, then the systems are not good and are not safe for users to be on. You can only imagine just logging in on your Facebook or Instagram, and the first thing you would see is an ISIS group beheading someone. I think that would scare you for you not to even go onto that platform again. And this is what moderators do, trying to clean up the systems and trying to clean up the feeds for users to be able to surf through this social media platforms without having any psychological distress. But at the same time, you can also imagine the mental health toll it has on these workers. So content moderation is key and it's very important. Without it, then there would be no users on this platform. But also the way it's structured, it's that content moderation is the least on the hierarchy. It's not even considered as a skill. It's not considered as work. It's not considered as the main backbone of these platforms. And hence, as part of our advocacy, personally for me, my advocacy journey starting from 2023 after our petition and all that. But we can see that the situation for these workers haven't really changed. Yeah, people now are aware of it, but workers continue to be like a sheep in the midst of the wolves in all aspect, stemming from the companies themselves, from people out there. There's always a way that even people who claim to protect workers' rights don't really protect the workers' rights. They see the workers as, you know, people who don't have any form of protection. So whenever we have a chance to deal with them, we take advantage of them, we manipulate them, and we also put them in more precarious situation than how we met them. And hence, we are really advocating for human rights protection of these workers in all aspects, not even because we've been focusing more on big tech workers, but there's a lot happening even outside of big tech, even with the individuals and the organizations you engage with. And hence, there's a lot of things that needs to change in terms of protecting the workers on all aspects. How do we have a structure? How do we allow even the workers to protect themselves? Because all the structures have been put to really stop workers from protecting themselves. And I'm very proud of what the Data Labelers Association is doing, because even from the registration, you can see you have to lay low for you to be able to even register an organization. For us as African content moderators, we encountered a lot of challenges even during registration in Nairobi, because the government feels like, okay, this is a group that have sued a big tech company. They're pushing away investors. They will not allow investors to come to Africa, to our country, to bring out, they say youth from poverty. That's the language. And then coming to Nigeria, we encountered a lot of issues, because we met people who we thought would protect the rights of workers, lawyers who thought they would protect our human rights, and ended up even putting us in more precarious situation, ending up registering a union, not for the workers, and also suing me as a person. So you can just imagine how the structures have been put uh, that haven't really protected the workers. In as much as we can hear and see, when we look deeply into this issue, you can see that workers are always seen as the least and also seen as the most vulnerable, and hence we can always take advantage of them. And we are right now, as the Nigerian Content Moderators Union, because of all the challenges that we face, and also the lawsuits that I have faced, and also people, the same lawyers would go block the registration, apart from even the government saying, okay, what do these guys do? We have registered now a cooperative, and through the cooperative now, we're able now to bring workers together. But you can imagine how your voice is always being, tried to be shut, because you are fighting for the rights of fellow workers. And these are Africans like you, who you expect they should do better, professionals who claim to protect human rights and workers. But deep down, they know they don't protect workers. And hence, there's a lot of things that need to do, from policy, from even research. I've been actively part of research around mental health to see that. And from the research that we currently did, we can see that African content moderators face more psychological distresses than other moderators in other parts of the world. And this is not far-fetched, because we can know the situation. As a Nigerian taken to Kenya to work as a moderator, you're put in a precarious situation, you don't have a work permit, and also you have signed a non-disclosure agreement that bars you from even explaining or telling your loved ones, okay, this is the kind of work I do. I want to resign and come back home. The first thing you'll be told is, no, just continue staying there, try to get a job, try to, look for other means of getting uh, another source of income before resigning from what you're doing, because they don't really understand what you're going through and the precarity of the situations, because they'll be like, okay, there's always a way around it. And hence you realize you've stayed longer than you thought you would in this kind of work. And coming back also after you've left the job, the stigma, because people view you as, okay, mentally disturbed, you don't know what you're doing, you are not as normal, what the community will say normal, as you used to be, because now you're struggling with the PTSD, the the paranoia and all that. And from our petition, we all went through psychiatric evaluation, which proved that all of us are going through post-traumatic stress disorder, among other mental health illnesses. So if there is no structure, this is now 3 years, and in court, we're still on jurisdiction and all that. But gladly, last week, no, 2 weeks now, we've been able to get a ruling from the court that Meta and all those guys will be in court in the trial to explain how this work is being done, and we can be able now to cross-examine them, and the world can hear what we went through. And for us, that's a baby step, but also it's a great win for us, because now people can be able to know what these workers actually go through. And 3 years, you can imagine your life is on hold. You can't really move forward. The anxieties that come with the court dates, the the postponements, your anxieties are almost, all over the place, always, because it's like something is just not letting you move on. And you've been blacklisted as well, so you cannot even secure a job. So all these are issues that really hold the workers in a place where they are not supposed to be. But with our advocacy, we've seen a lot of changes. We've seen even the workers now understanding that it's okay to have these mental health issues, and it's okay also to seek help. And it's okay also to feel the way you feel, because it's not your fault. The situations and the structures around you have not really allowed you to get the help that you need. But with all this that we're talking about, we've seen workers now speaking up. We've seen workers even engaging in those researches, unlike before, they would be like, oh, I'm going to lose my job if they know I am talking to you guys and all that. But we've seen workers gradually speaking up and saying, we don't want this. But the only problem that remains is, where do we seek refuge? Where is the organization, the union, the the body that really we can run to and be like, okay, this people are actually for us and are there to protect us through thin and, thick and thin. So there's always this trust issues that have been within the workers and also even people around, because of course, circumstances that we've seen. But it's gradual, and for us, we can say where we used to be, we've moved really further from where we used to be, and we're heading somewhere. And that's a big win for us. And together with Data Labelers Association doing a wonderful job, we see that in the nearest future, we can be able to point to those worker-led organizations and bodies that really, truly stand for workers.
Thank you so much, Kauna, for sharing both your reflections on what kind of folks engaging in data work experience, and also the kind of persistent and consistent work you've done in pushing for just labor conditions. And congratulations on some of the progress that you have been making recently. Um, Going to Jacqueline, some of the work that Ephantus and Kauna have described is generally organized around subcontracting arrangements that distributes responsibility across multiple actors. And it's not clearly located or pinpointed. And within these structures, could you help us understand where accountability becomes most difficult to enforce?
Thank you so much. I think I would automatically say, as the previous speakers have talked about labor component in the AI supply chain. I think it's the one that issues around accountability become most difficult to enforce today. But let me pause there and allow us to reflect first on the AI supply chain and to center the question on where Africa really lies in this supply chain, so that we can look at accountability issues. As we all know, AI is not just codes and also algorithms. It's a global supply chain, and Africa is currently central at two particular points. The first one, it's at the beginning. Africa supplies critical minerals, for example, cobalt, lithium, and also copper, which are essential for AI hardware. And we have examples from DRC Congo, which produces, I think, over 70% of the world's cobalt, which is quite vital for batteries and also data centers backup systems. This is physically demanding job, often hazardous work, but also it's marred by informality, issues to do with child labor, and basically lack of any protections whatsoever. And most of the value of these mineral extraction is actually captured elsewhere. Secondly, further downstream, Africa is a major hub for human-in-the-loop work. We've talked about data labeling, data annotation, content moderation, but also quality assurances jobs. And in Kenya, for example, thousands of workers are employed to data labeling, but also moderation for global AI platforms. Their work is not is quite essential for training and maintaining AI systems, as we've heard from F and Kauna. but also they are classified as independent contractors sometimes, with little job security or even bargaining power. And here is where the accountability problem comes in two folds. One is the issue of control over AI systems. So who has the control over AI system? The model design, the benchmark, but also the governance system, which sits quite at the upstream and often in the global north. And then we have the second issue when it comes to accountability, where labor sits downstream and in Africa and in other regions. But legal responsibility for workers is actually pushed onto subcontractors and also intermediaries. So the hardest accountability that I would say becomes a question beyond actually regulation, but more on the misalignment between who exercises control, who has the power, and who sets how work is actually governed, and who bears legal responsibility, which is synonymous with the design of supply chain, not only in the AI supply chain, but we've seen that even in the traditional supply chain, for example, in the garment sector, which we are seeing the same problem. So AI firms dictate standards and workflows. This means that they have the power, but the workers who sustain these systems remain legally and institutionally invisible. So basically, the hardest accountability point is where essential human work sustains. And that's why I started by saying the labor component is the weakest in all these, where the workers themselves remain legally, but also institutionally invisible. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. So touching on the importance of visibility of this labor, I'm going to move on to Ephantus and particularly addressing one aspect of work or data labor, which is data annotation. And data annotators participate in directly defining what data categories such as toxicity, relevance, intent, and accuracy. And earlier, you used the metaphor to describe them as teaching a child. Could you walk us through how these data annotators are already shaping how AI systems interpret the world, even through governance frameworks, even though they don't recognize decisions? How are data annotators shaping how AI systems interpret the world, and in turn, how we are now understanding
I think a key element that is important to highlight is that AI cannot exist without data, and it needs to be very structured data. So if I give an example, when you talk about, say, we want to teach, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the self-driving cars, the autonomous vehicles. So it's very specific data. So it's data that, say, it's pictures or videos of vehicles as they are driving. And so there's images of buildings and all that. And so if we wanted to teach the self-driving car how to identify people on the road, for example, so we would get images or videos with people, and then we would annotate the people and then feed it to the AI algorithm. And then the more we feed it with that data, so the smarter it gets in terms of identifying people by itself. This applies across very many fields. So when we talk about, for example, like LLMs, so you teach it how to, for example, first you need to teach it how to identify words. For example, you can also be able to teach it like how to string sentences together, how, for example, it can be able to infer emotions and things of that nature. And even some crazy projects where we were teaching it how not to say, you see, when you, for example, prompt, let's say ChatGPT for an example, when you ask it about how to commit suicide, for example, it won't give you an answer. But then somebody trained it how to do that. So specifically, it's like it's called the negative response training, where, for example, you're given prompts and you're supposed to, for example, it will tell you, give a detailed description of how you would skin a person alive, how you would molest a child. And then this information is what is fed to these LLM systems to be able to teach them that this is a negative sort of response. And the same applies also to, we could say, the other side. So when you're talking about whenever you prompt it and you want, for example, to do math, it's been trained on that. When you talk about the law, it's also been trained on how to do that. And so what we get whenever you're using it as you're going about your daily activities, for example, I think there's a lot of dependence that's coming up, in terms of, for example, you would like to create, let's say, a policy brief. A lot of people would actually rely on the LLM that was actually developed by a data annotator and, depend on that to make sure that, and believe that that is the correct version. And the other bit is that even the person who's going to review this policy brief will also feed the same document to another AI system to check whether this document is correct. And so, based off of the dependence, that is the increasing dependence on, the AI systems to do our daily activities or to come up with, say, important documents, or even to make major decisions in life. It is very dependent on the LLM that was actually developed, but then the development of that LLM is dependent on the data annotator. So in a way, you can see how that all ties about. And one thing that actually is important to point out is that there's actually a lot of bias. So, as much as I am for AI, I think there's also the need to caution people in terms of the bias, because, an LLM or an AI system can only be as good as the data that it was trained on. And what happens is that there's a lot of bias that is actually induced while training. So, maybe it's a side example, but for example, when it comes to beauty standards, where, for example, you're given instructions. So as a data annotator, you're told that this is our definition of what a beautiful person is. And so they'll give you maybe an image of, a white lady. She has blonde hair, a pointy nose. And so in case you come across an image that is not reflective of that, then that is not classified as beautiful. But then when now people get to use an LLM and they're talking about, hey, I feel like I have blemish, I don't feel like I'm very beautiful, it won't directly tell them that they're not beautiful, but it will start maybe suggesting, maybe you can get plastic surgery, you can get this or that product. So you can see how the chain value of the data through the data annotators also affect the quality of the LLM and also the output that it actually gives. And so, yeah, it's a very important part, but also it's also very important to understand that there's also a lot of bias that's also induced in the development of this AI. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ephantus. I think a couple of the points that you touched on that are really important are how these systems have people behind them that it relies upon. And then in turn, people are now relying on these tools, which means that all of us who are now engaging in these systems are dependent on folks who are doing a lot of very difficult labor. And thank you so much for describing how, kind of in a couple of examples, what that looks like from the perspective of a data worker behind these. Kauna, if I may come to you, earlier you touched on how moderators are often exposed to material that would be kind of distressing or disturbing or has very large mental health impacts, negative mental health impacts on data workers. And I think that you're referring to the research that came out of the Distributed AI Research Institute that did publish that African data workers experience this very significantly. And a lot of this kind of experience would have been categorized as an occupational or a workplace hazard in other sectors, but it's framed as a quote unquote wellness issue when it comes to this sector. And could you perhaps describe who benefits from distinguishing it as kind of a wellness issue as opposed to an occupational hazard or a labor issue, and why we may need to reframe how we approach it?
All right, thank you. Of course, the big tech will always benefit from how we frame our responsibility when it comes to workplace hazard and specifically mental health. And the reason being, what they provide is just the client's requirement, right? So client's requirement from the third party company means that you need to go for, and it needs to be documented that every content moderator went for 30 minutes or to an hour every week for mental health support. But how does this mental support looks like? It looks like 15 minutes chit chat with a counselor. And starting even from who is this counselor? This counselor doesn't even know when they were employed that this is the group of people they're going to work with, people who watch graphic contents, people who experience secondary trauma. And, all these details were not given to the counselors. So it's actually almost the same with how we were employed when we were told we were going to be a translator, customer care agent. So they were employed just to be a workplace counselor. But there is emphasis because it needs to be specific counselors who knows how to deal with trauma, counselors who know how to support people who experience secondary trauma every blessed day. Is totally different from the normal clients you see in your therapy room. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I will tell you for a fact, the difference is so huge because the impacts are not even the same. And a lot of these companies would do that just to write down because you will be literally forced. You will just be sitting on your computer working. Your team leader will come to your desk and tell you, put on wellness because we have this the buttons, like the options for you to put if you're working, you're in production, if you're in on break and all that. So they'll just tell you, put it on wellness, 15 minutes, go to therapies A or B or C. So also there's no continuity. You can see different therapies at different times, which therapy doesn't work that way. When you're dealing with therapy, you have to have a specific therapist walking you through this journey. And also there's no assessment. From when I started working for 4 years, I've never been assessed of any sort of how my mental health is progressing or what's going on with me. It's just their emphasis is just let's document. The clients need to see the data that you went for therapy, and also your dashboard needs to indicate that you were on wellness. And this is the 15 minutes, the 20 minutes. And when you go to the therapist, the things they talk to you is about how is your cat doing? What did you eat today? Things that doesn't really help you in any way when it comes to your mental health. And for us as the workers, we've raised these issues over and over again. We've complained. Sometimes when you complain, they just change the therapies because whatever you discuss with the therapist doesn't stay there. You'll hear it in the mouth of your team leader or your manager. And, your stories are just all over the place when you discuss anything sensitive with the therapist. And that really affected our relationships with the therapist. No one wanted to go for therapy. If you even go for not therapy, I would say, for the check-ins, when you go for those check-ins, we just tell the therapist, I needed this time to just be alone. I don't want to talk to anyone. And you just sit there. Once it's 15 minutes, you walk away, and no one even cares. How are you actually doing? Because we've experienced where workers fall ill often, like very often, almost every day, a content moderator is on sick leave. And reason being because of the mental health impact it's having on us. And we look at even the laws in Kenya when it comes to the occupational health. Mental health is not explicitly stated that it's an occupational work hazard. And hence, even when we're in court, they will tell you, the parties will always say, we provide this mental health support. But now when we look at that, where do we get protected because of the harms that have been done? Yes, we've been assessed and we have evidence that we've been affected significantly by this job. So where do we seek recourse? And this is part of our petition. also that it's included, because now it tells you in the African countries here in this part of the world where mental health is not considered as a serious, illness, and the stigma also around it. Laws, even in Kenya, just of recent, if you attempt to unalive yourself, you can be taken to the prison, not to seek mental health. It's not even seen as an issue that you need help. Rather, it's seen as a criminal thing. But our petition now is bringing out all these things, and also the awareness for the workers as well, to know that this is actually a big deal, because your life can never be the same again. Mental health illnesses takes forever. You keep dealing with it. They come in different times, different shapes, different triggers, and hence even we have to keep pushing for policies that really protects mental health, because in this, what they call the new form of work, mental health is a key thing. You can see my finger chopped off, you can see my arm off, my ears, my eyes, but in me, I'm actually dying. I might look all that good outside, but the next thing is someone has attempted to unalive themselves, because you can't see it, and hence people just minimize or try to just miss when it comes to mental health. And it's important that we also, as us on our end, we're also trying to create this awareness even to the workers, that you need to take care of your mental health. In as much as nobody sees it, you know what you're passing through, you know what you're experiencing. And our research from the Data Workers Inquiry, but recently, which I will drop the link to the research that we did with some researchers in the University of Minnesota in the US, clearly shows that we experience higher mental health distress than other moderators in the world. So you can also see the circumstances also around us really make these issues even worse than others, because of no security of job, no protection. You go to the courts, it takes forever. So while you're in court, what do? Who take care of you? Because if you don't get the final judgment, which forces now these parties to take full responsibility, then your life continue to suffer. And we can see in the past 3 years, none of these parties have ever reached out to any of the workers. While it was stated in our redundancy notice that you will have 1 year mental health support, 24 hours, but yet, with which phone are you using to call Kenya when you are all over Africa, someone in South Africa, Nigeria, Uganda? They're not Kenyans. You expect them to call them from their own phones, using their own airtime to book for a therapy session. And all these things clearly shows that they are not willing. It's just for the reason of documentation as usual. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kauna, for describing how the importance of mental health is not necessarily only just as a checkbox type of issue, but one that responds to the particularities of the distress that the job exposes most folks to, and also kind of the labor relations that are quite unfair in space. And building off of that, Jacqueline, I think that earlier it was mentioned how a lot of these efforts to unionize, for example, or any kinds of kind of improvement of labor conditions, like efforts towards that, are not necessarily, there isn't a necessarily enabling environment for that. And could you speak to the risks that are created for workers when a lot of this work of AI production remains outside of the regulatory oversight?
Yeah, thanks. This is quite a critical question, and it goes to the heart of why so many workers still remain unprotected in the AI supply chain. And maybe it's also a chance to reflect that AI labor governance cannot really be governed on one particular law. So it needs to have different dimensions. For example, when you're talking about occupational health and safety, how does that look like? When you're talking about labor relations in regard to the right to freedom of association, but also collective bargaining, even when there's an occupational issue in regards to safety and health, how do workers access remedy in the works and injury benefits laws. So the whole labor law component, but also beyond that, areas to do with data protection. How is algorithmic management looking like when it comes to the laws under data protection laws, where so many countries in Africa have now such kind of a regulation. But what is also interesting is the AI regulation conversations. In Africa right now, we have different governments enacting different strategies, but also policies on AI. But also we have countries that have come up with AI bills. Currently, we have one that is sitting in Senate here in Kenya. But one thing that is coming up is that the discussions around, or not even the discussions, the regulations around AI specifically really talk about issues to do with is the system biased? Is it safe? Is it explainable? Even critical tensions around is regulating AI a good thing for Africa to start with? Is it going to stifle development of AI and innovation? Such kind of conversations are finding themselves in the AI regulation space. But these frameworks on AI regulation ignores the people who make AI possible. They overlook the labor conditions behind the data, the realities faced by annotators, the moderators, but also other human workers, and how also AI is also intersecting with traditional quote unquote employment or workers who are interacting with AI, even in their traditional jobs. And the first issue is on the labor invisibility. So AI regulation, as I have mentioned, is obsessed with probably technical outcomes, the biasness, the safety, the explainability, system performance, etc., etc. And it really asks the question, who is training the system? Under what conditions are these workers behind the system? With what protections? Where is the law failing when it comes to protecting these workers? What are the realities when it comes to the workers interacting with AI, or who are behind AI? So the result is that workers who label data, who moderate content, or even who provide human feedback, are literally left outside regulatory oversight, despite their work being quite essential, and their rights still remain, and also their safety remain invisible. But also what is quite interesting is that even when we are coming up with these AI regulations and also policies and frameworks, basically, we find that workers are also left outside the conversations where policy is being made. So for example, in Kenya, you'll find that, yes, we had, for example, academia, we have people from the civil society, but workers' voice were never there. When the discussions around how do we create a policy in Kenya around AI. So we've also seen suppression of workers' voice. So workers who are subcontracted or even in platform work, who are classified as contractors, who are denied collective bargaining rights because of their nature of these misclassification, but also the nature of their work, and also excluded from governance. Even when they exercise their right to freedom of association, we've seen, which is the cornerstone of labor governance, they face retaliation. Some workers are blacklisted or even red listed, they are deactivated, redundancies are declared, or even companies are closing shop and moving elsewhere, leaving workers, thousands of workers jobless. And then it brings the critical tension of asking between unemployment and having like a work that is not decent, what are we going to choose? So regulation that assumes complaints, audits, or even internal reporting will work is fundamentally flawed, because workers cannot safely speak. And for example, a Kenyan content moderator working for a global platform may have no channel to report psychological harm or unfair treatment, as Kauna has mentioned. The other issue is on jurisdiction arbitrage and also legal gaps, as I had earlier talked about, where we are finding that companies are investing or taking the issue of labor in countries that have weaker enforcement or even not sufficient coverage in terms of protections. So the deeper challenge lies on also the labor laws that were designed, or were not designed for algorithmic management, or even global supply chains, algorithm which act as bosses, but legal responsibility, which is quite fragmented. So multinational companies at the top are rarely made severally or even vicariously liable for violations that occur further down the supply chain. So even when workers are harmed, there's often no clear path to remedy, especially when companies claim that they cannot be sued locally, which you've seen, and aren't registered in the country or have no contractual relationship with the workers, which is the design of the supply chain. This is not just a technical oversight. It's actually a structural failure where regulations govern systems, but not the labor regimes that produce them. This creates the illusion of accountability without really protection. So essentially, the risk is not really regulation of AI and all that discussions in regard of the system and how it looks like, but also the main question that Africa should also be asking itself is having unregulated AI or even AI that is built on unregulated labor or labor that is not necessarily protected in the different labor governance system that has not caught up with the reality of the AI supply chain or even the fragmented supply chain, where we also have algorithmic bosses. If really we want real accountability, there's really an opportunity, or even there's a need to push for AI regulation and labor law that evolve together and not necessarily like one is lagging behind. So that would be my reflection on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for giving us kind of the legal perspective of how challenging it is to seek redress, remedy, and recourse for the different kinds of labor issues that have been addressed during our discussion today. In the last 5 minutes, I think I can open it up to folks in the room if they have questions that they would like to pose to either a specific panelist or all of the panelists. And if there aren't questions, then just one final question for everyone to. Um, so if people can raise their hands, I believe that our hosts are going to be able to. I don't see any hands. Oh, I see two actually. Charlene, I can't see the order.
Yes,
Are you able
from
to call on
Tatenda.
the?
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Jacqueline. That was a very well put summary of all the legal issues. I just wanted to find out, have you had a chance to look at the AI bill? Does it in any way touch on any of these issues or completely ignores it and just regulates just regulates AI? I think the just governs the use of AI, but doesn't touch on the labor rights. What are your thoughts on that?
Should I respond, or should we take the second question and then respond later?
I think you may respond and then we can call on the second person.
Okay. Yes, I've looked at the AI bill, the draft, And I think it provides opportunity where we can have accountability, but also transparency. So there's the issue of impact assessment and all that. But a lot is still left. There's still a lot that needs to be done in regards to the bill to ensure that workers will be protected. And we are currently working on coming up with the top issues that workers' organizations need to be looking at in regards to responding to the AI bill. And maybe we can have a discussion later. I can drop my email in regards to what is missing in the AI bill as it is. What are the good, but also what is important is also the narrative around do we just like stop regulating AI for innovation purposes, quote unquote, and this means that workers are going to be left unprotected even in that ecosystem. So for me personally, my opinion is that we have some good clauses, some few of them, but they still, to a larger extent, a lot of stuff that is still missing in regards to the AI bill.
Thank you so much for responding.
Thank you.
Atenda, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you so much, Salam. My question goes to Jacqueline, and I think it's related to the previous question. Because then you mentioned that, yes, there is an element of regulation, but it doesn't touch well on the labor rights and the rights of the people that are, especially the data labelers. I would say people that are on the lower part of the chain. So my question is, or rather maybe just a point to say, don't you think instead of us maybe trying to probe for the AI regulations to put or to include these labor rights, labor issues within those same bills, don't you think it's possible that we have a separate bill that just touches on that? Because then I think it's a very important aspect and it doesn't have to be treated as a maybe by the way kind of thing. And I feel like it being left out, not only in Kenya, but I think the whole of Africa and maybe on a global scale, it's intentional rather than being a mistake. So don't you think that maybe instead of us looking at having these AI regulations to say, let's include this part of labor, we need also to look at separate, which actually represent the workers? Yeah.
Thank you for that question. I think from a policy and regulation perspective, that is always like the question, how do we regulate these? Should we amend our existing laws in regard to the reality of the digital economy? Or should we come up with a different law together that is targeting the digital economy, given the nuances that are in this space? But also, are there opportunities that we can see in regard to specific issues? For example, when it comes to the AI regulation, which are the aspects can go to the AI regulation? Personally, it's a bit of everything here and there. So I would think just like you, like let's come with a different law where we have like all these issues together, the algorithmic management, the surveillance issues and all that. But then that has to be quite very comprehensive. There's also like the other approach in regards to mental health. Mental health is not only affecting workers in the digital economy, it's now also affecting other workers in the traditional, quote unquote, traditional employment. Does that mean that they will be necessarily covered in this specific regulation? But also we are finding workers, for example, if you're working from home, or you're even working in the office, you are literally interacting also with AI. For example, when it comes to HR systems, which now are using AI of late. So what does that mean also for the other workers who are not necessarily like qualified to be in the digital economy in regards to these regulations? So also amending our existing labor laws, or even expanding the interpretation of existing labor laws to cover the nuances of digitized workplaces would go like a very long way, even when we are looking at targeted laws for the digital economy. But also acknowledging the fact that these two approaches needs to be quite broader, because we talked about data protection, which has like a different law altogether. But also we have issues to do with access to information, for example, on transparency, which would be covered maybe on access to information laws. So I would say that it's a cocktail of everything in terms of approach that different institutions or even workers' organization can push for. Yeah.
Can I, sorry, can I just do a follow-up?
In the interest of time, I know we have one more question. Are you able to follow up in the chat and then we can go back and forth there? Okay, perfect. Thank you. I think there's one last question. And Jacqueline, there are also folks asking for your contact if you're comfortable. So we can continue those questions. I think one more question, Tammy.
Thank you, Salam. Good morning from here in England, and I want to say thank you to all of you who've presented, Jacqueline, Kauna, and Ephantus. And I want to also say thank you for all the amazing work you're doing. Every time I use AI, I think about all of you, and I don't mean it in a flattery way, because I'm actually doing my research in this particular area of work. I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Warwick. And I'm also leading an AI project at the University of Oxford. So I think this is a very, very important conversation to have. And I think we don't have this kinds of conversation enough. We see quite a number of publications in research, but I think it's time to move the conversations out of that space where people don't really look and begin to bring public intellectualism, to the front. And I'm happy that you workers are the ones, leading that charge. I have a bit of curiosity. I'll ask some here, and then hopefully I get to engage with all of you via email or online. My question comes from a place of knowing that Sama AI recently laid off about 1,100 workers. I think I saw the news this week from one of you. And also, I know that Scale AI also left Kenya, I think at some point last year. So I'm just curious to know, number one, how workers reacted to this news, right? Because I assume that quite a number of people would be left without jobs. And these are jobs that people are complaining about already. So is it a celebratory thing for workers who complain about these jobs already? Or are they in a position where, they're asking questions? So I would really love to know how workers react or respond to this move out of Kenya and to the layoff. That's one. The second question is, I'm trying to understand the advocacy. All right. So is the advocacy really about just improving the conditions of worker, or for these jobs to actually not exist? If it's about improving the conditions of the worker, what would be the threshold that what would be the threshold that would mean that the livelihood or the lived experiences of this workers has actually been improved? Would it be more wages? If it's more wages, how much would be enough? All right. So I think those are my three questions. And it's to, if any one of you, Kauna or Ephantus. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just answer the first, and maybe Ephantus will help with the rest. I worked for Sama, and I went through the same process the 1,100 workers are going through. And such news usually come with so much, it's mixed emotions. And just to clarify that the advocacy we are doing actually is not for this work to be taken away, right? The advocacy is for better working conditions. We need to be paid as how we are supposed to be paid. We know that not in Africa, in other parts of the world, workers are paid nothing less than $15 upwards. And hence we are paid around $1 or less. that shouldn't be the case. I am a Hausa speaker. I am a native from Borno State, which is Bura, because I know you're a Nigerian. I would be happy to see AI tools or languages that it's in my local language, and no one would do that. I have to do it, right? So we are not saying these jobs shouldn't be done, but what we are saying, they need to do better. Our human rights need to be protected. I can't be doing this work because I want in the next 10 years, 15 years, my kids, grandkids to see the language or culture not fade away. But then I've lost my life in the process, because mental health issues literally is a gateway to losing your life. We don't need to lose our lives because we want to build or develop AI systems that is for us, but rather the systems should be put in place where our rights are protected, we're paid how we need to be paid. And of course, it's a broad conversation, but workers currently are in disarray. Emotionally, you don't even know where to go to. And you need to also remove even the word SAMA from your CV as it is, because any employer who sees you've worked for SAMA will be like, no, I don't want to deal with this. So you can just imagine what the workers are actually going through. When I saw the news, I was so emotional, because I can just remember how I felt the day we were called in that town hall meeting, and we were told some of our colleagues even fainted, they was crying, you know. So the emotions will always be there. But the thing is, if the last time we were talking about around 300 or more, now we're talking about 1,000 of people who are broken, released back to the society with no form of support. I'm sure you could just only imagine how this would be. So I will allow Ephantus to also speak about the rest.
This is a problem that we share across content moderators and data labelers. The thing is, data labeling has actually become the hot topic in the last 2-3 years. So everybody is now talking about data labeling and AI. But the reality of it is that, personally, like for me, I got into the space 8 years ago. And what we saw at summer is something that is continuously happening. It's just that now there's a lot of eyeballs just looking at the space and seeing what is going on. I'll actually give you a story. So we were working for a platform. So tech companies, what they do is let's say it's Meta. What they do is they find a subsidiary that they then use to hire people, and then they use this to kind of avoid accountability and all these things. So I'll give you the example. So we have Scale AI, which is like the largest. The owner is a billionaire. He was claimed the youngest billionaire, I think, in 2024 or thereabout. And so he created a platform called Remotask. And so we worked on Remotask. Actually got recruited as a trainer, so I used to train people. But what would happen is that now, because I have a boot camp, I would get paid $400. It's okay money for me. It's I can pay for my bills and all these things. But the condition of this work was that I needed to find, at all times, I needed to have 100 people in my boot camp. So what the boot camp is I would onboard people, teach them how to do this work, and then release them into the Remotask ecosystem to continue training. Ideally, it would take 4 weeks. So for the first week, it was basic training on what the tool looks like, how to go about training tasks, how to get good quality. By week 2, people were already tasking, but had to task now with my assistant. So as they are annotating, it's like, this is how you're supposed to go about it. This is what you do. By week 3, it's more where we're still in the boot camp. People are still working, but in case you have any questions, you can reach out to me. And then by week 4, you're supposed to leave the boot camp and now continue working on by yourself. But ideally, we would allow them to still stay on the boot camp. So that's 4 weeks. And what would happen is that, so for week 1, people would not get paid because it's training. But then from week 2, people are already submitting tasks. Week 3 and 4, people are working actively. But then people would not get paid for the work that they did for this period of time. So a lot of people drop off. But remember, I have a target of 100 workers in my bootcamp. So that would mean that so that I don't get fired and lose my income, I need to consistently recruit. So because I knew people would drop off, so I was consistently recruiting. So today I would recruit 10, tomorrow it would be 15, the other day it would be 20. And so the bootcamp always had 100 people. So what would happen is that the work on their end was being consistently done, and it was being done to very high quality because of the control checks and everything. But then these workers were not being paid. Because they were not being paid, they would drop off, and then we would find new people, recruit them, take them through the process, submit very high quality work, and then drop off, and then get another new batch. And so you can see they kind of created a system where they were actually exploiting workers in a way where they were being given high quality work, but then this work was not being paid for, was not compensated. What happened is that there was this huge uproar online where we have 10,000 people talking about how the account was wrongfully terminated, how they were not paid, and it trended, I think, on Twitter or yeah, I think it was on Twitter. And what they did, they actually released a statement saying that Kenya was a very fraudulent country and that's why they pulled out. So Remotas was actually closed. They rebranded the platform. So when you looked at it's now called Outlier. So they changed Remotas to Outlier. The only thing they changed was the name and the color of the platform, but everything else remained exactly the same. What they did by pulling out was that they essentially left 200, 300,000 people jobless, but nobody was speaking about it, even as there's this huge uproar, like exactly what can you do about it? For example, if my account was terminated, is there any recourse? Who do I go to report? I can't go to the police, for example. If they were supposed to pay me, say, $50, $500, but they terminated my account or say they would not pay me, where's the recourse? There's really nothing that can be done. And so that's why we came about and brought the association. The problem that we face is that for a lot of these platforms, what they do is just as they did, they don't have a physical location in the country that they have, or even if they do, they can just pull out and go to a new jurisdiction. So, for example, for Remotas, they banned Kenya, but then they set up shop in Ghana because it's an online platform. Then, as I said, the subsidiary. So we have, for example, Meta was using some as a subsidiary to employ people. But then, so because now there's a lot of heat around their operations and everything, they pulled out of Kenya. We don't know where they'll set up shop, but probably in the next month or so, you'll hear they set up a shop, or they'll actually find a different subsidiary and then offer jobs through that subsidiary. And so it's a real systemic issue where there's no way to hold these companies accountable for the things that they are doing. Even though you have contracts, they can be precarious contracts, but the contracts do exist. But then, what's the recourse? How do you go about following up with these issues? And how do you go about like holding them accountable for all these injustices and all this exploitation they are doing? So they did lay off 1,108 workers. We can't speculate for the reasons, but we want to believe that it was because of an article that was produced exposing them for wrongfully collecting data using the meta ray-bans. See, so they claim that if you can interact with it, then it will show you things as you're moving about. So it's like a direct LLM assistant or something. But what people did not know that as they are using them, they were actually collecting data, and this data was being processed at SAMA. So this whole expose that happened, they used it as a justification to actually pull out and then go somewhere else, but then essentially left 1,108 workers. So this is actually something that we're struggling with as the association, because what exactly can we do as a recourse to actually get these people, maybe to compensate these workers for the time that they don't have? How about the severance, where you're supposed, for example, to pay, I think 15 days severance for every year that these workers have worked, but we have people who worked for 5, 6 years. And then also, people were actually told that if they were given some compensation, it's not a lot, but they were told, in order for us to give you compensation, what we want you to sign is, they were given a document saying that you will not sue Sama or Meta if you take this amount. So given these two options, what would you do? So the thing is, we are not fighting against the introduction of AI or the incorporation into systems or people using AI. We believe that it can bring a lot of efficiency, but then our problem is that they are actually exploiting workers. And there's this narrative that AI is magic, but we feel that it is an intentional effort by these tech companies so that just to make sure that the human labor aspect of this work is masked. So that even as these conversations are being had, majority of the consumers in the world don't even know that there's a human labor aspect attached to this kind of work, and therefore they can be able to get away with some of these injustices that they are doing. So some of the advocacy work that we are doing, for example, as the Data Labelers Association, what we are saying is we understand that you're bringing these jobs to the global south because you're looking for things like cheap labor, right? But then if you pay somebody $30 to $60 an hour in the US because of their high cost of living and the living standards and everything, why not pay someone, for example, in Kenya at $5 an hour, which is not too much, but would be a decent income, right? It would still qualify as cheap labor for you, but then it would also be a decent income for someone in Kenya. Also, if you're going to put content moderators through this horrific work, we understand it's work that needs to be done, but then why not put psychosocial protections in place to protect these workers so that even if you look at this graphic content that the content moderators encounter is here, they've seen so many graphic things of people getting in accidents, people dying, people doing all horrendous sort of things. But because you know that these people are looking at this content, don't you understand that it will have a mental implication on these people? So why not put psychosocial protections in place? So, for example, if you can have counselors, for example, who are non-biased, who understand this kind of work, why not offer, for example, incentives for, you can have leave days every, 1.5 months, then you can get off maybe 4 or 5 days off um, just to I don't know, to recalibrate or things of that. So there are a lot of things, and they're very simple things that these tech companies can be able to do to actually observe the rights of these workers and actually give them reputable working conditions. But a lot of tech companies tend to avoid that. The last thing is they've actually segmented it into a section. So if, for example, I studied economics and finance in campus, this is back in 2016. So I have a degree in economics and finance. But I joined this space in 2018, and right now we're in 2026. So what has happened is I can't go back to what I was doing before because I've never even worked in that space because this was the first job I got. So essentially, I am stuck in this space. However, workers are actually faced as either gig workers or informal workers, which means that, for example, the 8 years that I've worked in this space don't account for anything whenever I go try to apply jobs in other different kinds of spaces. So that means that unless I can find another tech company to work for, essentially I can't get any type of formal employment from a different space. And tech companies understand that and they try to take advantage of that situation. And the narrative they usually use is that, hey, if you don't fall in line, if you are not comfortable with this amount, kindly leave because there's someone else who's waiting to take up that job. So a lot of the advocacy work that we are doing is trying to actually bring a lot of awareness around some of these issues that a lot of these workers are facing so that they can now, as policymakers are making policies, they can make policies with this information in mind so that they can actually incorporate that into the policies they're coming up with. And then also that there can be pressure even from the consumers, from researchers, from policymakers, and from workers themselves to the tech companies to hold up their end in terms of human rights, because that isn't a privilege, that is a necessity, that is something that needs to be incorporated in every workspace. So yeah, that's essentially what we are looking at in terms of the space and the work that we're trying to do. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both Ephantus and Kauna, for responding to that. And Jacqueline, I know that you have been continuing to respond in the chat. And thank you for the attendees for staying on even as we went over time. So I think that our panelists have kind of given us clear calls to action for calling for more just labor conditions for for those who are working in the AI space as data workers. The only last note that I'll have is for panelists to send any of the petitions, research, and other kind of materials that you have mentioned so that we can share it with panelists, with attendees. And thank you everyone for attending, and have a lovely rest of your day.